appreciate everybody coming. I know September 21st, the United Nations International Day of Peace is it's a big day for myself and other people that are active in peace. And for us, 4 years ago, Fred, is that when you were president? 4 years ago in 2017, we dedicated the San Miguel's Peace Pole to in both clubs, and the Rotaracers were able to put this together over, probably took me almost 2 years to get the permits, and it's in a real prominent place in Parque Juárez, and the Rotary names there. And a year later, on September 21st, led by the Club Rotario, the evening Spanish-speaking club, they intuned a time capsule that had over 500 children's artwork, and the answer to this question is, what does peace mean to you now, and what is your hope for peace in 50 years? And a lot of them got the idea that 50 years existed and they were going to be as old as their grandmother, but at someday. But those two things are really special, and San Miguel and this club and the Club Rotario and Rotarac work together on that, and it's a very special piece, been recognized in the United Nations, and it's something this club has to be proud of. Carlos Juárez was, we had the International Economics and Peace Institute person that's in the executive director. Carlos was at, we had a conference around that in 2015, and we called it the Peace and Prosperity Conference, and tried to talk about peace and profit in the same sentence, which for many Mexican businessmen was a fairly radical concept. But Carlos is going to tell us this morning about the Mexican Peace Index, probably touch on the international peace and the global peace index, and I'm really proud to have him. When I go to other Rotary International things, as polio's needs go down, they're hoping that Rotary's leadership in the peace of the planet, both with the forming of the United Nations and now the polarity that's going on, they're really hoping to have an impact. And thank you very much. And Carlos, take it away.
Thank you, Tom. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And yes, I'm today, International Peace Day is like, it's like being an elf on Santa's elves on Christmas Eve. So I need to be several places, and but I'm very happy, and I appreciate your invitation to be here with you. I need to say, I'm besides the global partnership we have between Rotary International and the Institute for Economics and Peace, and being the director for Mexico, I'm also very close to Rotarians because I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow. I was in Duke University studying my master's between 2014 and 2016. And I have great friends. I've lived violence very closely. I am originally from Acapulco. I've lived there most of my life. So I know how it feels to see your places, your home, your community to fall into violence and to lose hope sometimes. So that's actually the reason I got into this peace business and peace issues. But I do have to leave around 10:25, so I need to hurry, and I have a presentation I would like to share. I don't know if the host would allow me to share my screen. So, well, I apologize in advance for bringing some bad news, but I think we need to look at at our reality. We need to look at our context so we can understand it, and then we can change it. I don't think we should fall in despair, but I don't think we should be over optimistic, or I don't think we should avoid reality, and that's why we measure peace in Mexico with the Mexico Peace Index. I want to start, in case you don't know the Institute for Economics and Peace. I'm not assuming you do. We are an independent think tank based and founded in Australia, in Sydney. We're trying to shift the conversation around peace, because even though we all know what peace means to us, or to each one of us, when we want to develop solutions, when we want to build peace, and we want to develop or create policy that affects several millions of people, then we need to be serious about definitions. And peace is something we don't define often enough. And that's why we want to measure it, we want to define it, and we want to make it something tangible, something we can actually almost touch. So it's something real and not so abstract that it usually is. As I told you, we are founded and based in Sydney, but we have international offices in Brussels, in The Hague, in Zimbabwe, Harare, Zimbabwe, New York, and Mexico City. Those are international offices. I am in charge of Mexico City, but for practical purposes, I end up overseeing, or I end up being in charge of the Latin American region, because due to language and natural trend to the Latin American culture. As Tom mentioned, we have been producing for the past 13 years the Global Peace Index. I'm not sure it's okay for me to say it, but it's the truth. Many people say it. This is the most recognized and the reference on peace in the world. This is the most recognized measure of peace in the world, the most complex, the most holistic. So every year we measure 163 countries in the world. We use 23 indicators that have their own indicators in themselves, and or self-indicators. And as you can see in this world map, the red countries are the ones that are most violent or less peaceful, and the green ones are the most peaceful countries in the world. Mexico, as you can imagine, as you can see in Guanajuato, actually, we have been falling positions over the past decade. We are now in the position 140 out of 163. Now we have the chance, and we have had the opportunity to produce a specific report or a specific piece of research for Mexico for the past 8 years. We take the methodology of the Global Peace Index, and we adapt it. We develop new indicators, new sub-indicators. We weight these indicators differently. And then we have a compounded index where we measure the levels of peace of the 32 states in the country. We use 5 key indicators, and every indicator has its own sub-indicators. We consider this a holistic analysis that allows us to better understand, I wouldn't say fully, but I would say better understand the complexity and the systemic nature of peace and violence in our country. We measured 3 things, 3 main components: negative peace, we are going to see what that is, positive peace, and the economic impact of violence. And I have to say again, I have to say no other organization measures this in Mexico. And some other reports measure specific things on violence, but or in the economic impact, but this is the most complete measure and analysis in the country. With this report, we expect that decision makers in Mexico or policy designers could have better information to do it. We expect the civil society organizations like Rotary, like Rotary clubs, to have better arguments, to have information, to have new information, to develop their strategies, their programs, their projects. And finally, we want other sectors like the private sector, academic sectors, to make better decisions or to get involved in peace matters in their community. The report is like around 100 pages, so it's very, I think it's an easy read. It's not too technical, it's not too heavy on the reading. And you can find several approaches to peace and violence. I'm now today bringing you a very quick overview of just a few pieces of information I consider would be interesting for you. Overall, well, I need to say, we measure full and complete years. So the last year we measured was 2020, and we published it in the 2021 index. The reason we measure full years is because we need to compare year-to-year trends, and we also only use official information for our analysis. When we don't have information, we try to find it, we try to estimate it, but in general, we use official data for two reasons. One, because we only governments with all their structure and their resources can guarantee to have a robust methodology year after year that we can that can actually make comparable the trends that we analyze. But very important too, we have a strategic reasons for using official data. And that's because, as you can imagine, many mayors, governors, or politicians, they don't like the news we bring them. They don't like the data we share. Sometimes when their territories are not performing well in peace, and they have this temptation to minimize or to discredit our work. And then when we tell them, no, this is not our information, it's your information, we only process it, then they need to listen to us, and then they see it, and then we can have a conversation and see what we can do together. Well, overall in Mexico, peacefulness improved very little, 3.5% in 2020. But this is important to highlight because we had been falling in the rankings, international rankings, and peacefulness in Mexico was falling for the past 4 years. So now that trend, and we were getting worse, but less worse, say it in a way, we were getting less worse or at a smaller pace over the past years. And now that trend finally changed, and we are improving in 2020, comparing 2019 to 2020. We need to be realistic. We don't want to be over optimistic. And this fall on violence had a lot to do with the confinement or the quarantine we had due to COVID-19. Especially those crimes or those forms of violence related to or connected to people's mobility on the street, people's commuting or people's presence on the streets, on the public space. Those indicators improved, but other indicators like family violence, sexual violence, or even crimes related to narco or to organized crime, those got worse actually. For the first time since we measure, for the first time in 8 years, the homicide rate went down very little, 1.3%. But again, it's worth mentioning because we haven't seen these improvements for years. And so we still have an historically high number of people killed in Mexico, more than 35,000 people killed, which means more than 35,000 families, orphans, widows, and broken communities, broken families. we are not taking into consideration here people that are missing, but that's also a high, very high number. We have in Mexico the 9th highest rate on homicide, the 9th highest homicide rate globally. So that's for us to remember not to get used to these numbers, because those numbers are not normal. We don't want those numbers. And finally, when we measure the economic impact of violence in the country, we find that our holistic measure, and I'm going to explain it a little bit later, overall violence costs us around 22% of our GDP. That's a lot of money per capita. That's more than 37,000 pesos per person living in Mexico. Anyway, this was just like a quick overview. We are going to see some other numbers and trends. Here to your right, you can see the 5 indicators we measure, we use to measure peace in Mexico. One is this indicator called detention without a sentence. And that's what we measure here is how many people are in jail that we don't know if they are innocent or guilty because the process hasn't been finished, or because the process has stopped, or whatever, an inefficiency of the judiciary system. This is very important to measure because we measure that efficiency, and in Mexico those numbers are high. Something around 42% of people in state jails, like state jails, 42% people of the people in jail, we don't know if they are innocent or guilty. Just to give you an idea on how bad it is in Mexico. And last year, the Congress incorporated 8 more crimes or 8 more felonies that would, on which lawyers were allowed to call this preventive prison. That's what we call it, prisión preventiva. That's the legal term. And so we are calling the judiciary system to be more efficient and to stop putting people in jail when they don't have a sentence. Only in cases where society could be in danger if someone accused is outside, or if the accused criminal or the accused person could run away. But that's it. No other crime should put people in jail. As I was telling you before, violence related to people's mobility went down, but other crimes like retail drug crimes or narcomenudeo, as we know it, actually got worse. In general, I was telling you 4 out of the 5 indicators got better, and it has to do a lot with COVID-19 and a couple of minor factors. This is the map of the country. Again, the red states are the most violent. The green ones are the most peaceful. As you can see, Guanajuato is ranked position 28 out of 32. And we are going to see some numbers on Guanajuato a bit ahead. We see violence is very concentrated. And we have this problem on our international ports that are receiving chemical precursor or chemical components for these new drugs like fentanyl and other synthetic drugs that we are receiving from Asia, especially China. Those come through these coasts, and that's why cartels are fighting the control of the international ports. We have another fight happening here in the north center of the country, in these red states, and that's because of, again, for the control of the traffic pathways to the US of fentanyl, poppy, or opium components. And then here, Sonora, Baja California, and Chihuahua states are also important for drug trafficking because of the being in the border or connected to the most profitable illegal drug market in the world, which is California and the East Coast, the West Coast of the US, I'm sorry. Also here in the center, at the center of the country, we have another conflict happening, which is the fight for gas theft, what we call huachicoleo. This gasoline theft and other forms of oil that are being robbed. And finally, in the peninsula of Yucatan and Quintana Roo, we have again another entry port of entry, international port, where we get cocaine and other forms of drugs from South America. That's kind of the landscape of the country and how violence is being concentrated, the organized crime violence. The most peaceful states are Yucatan for the 4th, 5th year, Tlaxcala, Chiapas, Campeche, Nayarit. Those states, they do have problems. It doesn't mean they are perfect. It just means that they are on top of the list. And at the bottom of the list, we have Baja California for the 3rd year, Colima with the highest homicide rate in the country, Zacatecas, Chihuahua, and Guanajuato for the 2nd year in position 28. These 5 least peaceful states, they have in common a high presence of organized crime, high level of firearms availability among citizens or civilians, and of course, a very high rate of homicide. Most of those homicides are committed with a firearm. We couldn't imagine, we couldn't have this huge homicide crisis in the country or violence crisis in the country with knives or even non-automatic weapons. It has to do a lot with the availability of weapons and with the power of those weapons. As I was telling you, most violence is concentrated. We see now that many states improved for the first time in many years, but we see a concentration. Just to give an example, 6 states in the country have more than half of the homicides in the country. Guanajuato, again, state of Mexico, Baja California, Chihuahua, Jalisco, and Michoacan. Those 6 states, they concentrate more than half of the killings in the country. We have in some states with huge improvements. This is to show you that even though states like Guerrero, Quintana Roo are not, they are still dealing with crime and they're still dealing with violence, but we can actually improve as a state, as a city, and as a society. We're not doomed to violence. We're not condemned to live in violence. And that's why we highlight these improvements. Quintana Roo improved 4 positions. Guerrero, my home state, have been in the last position, in the very, very bottom, and now is getting better, just a little bit better, not a lot. And then in the opposite, in the other extreme, the states that have gotten worse or really bad, Zacatecas fell 4 positions, San Luis Potosí fell 7 positions. Guanajuato remained in position 28, but still the indicators are looking really bad. And I'm going to show you some trends now that are very concerning. Measuring peace year after year for a long time allows us to have a better perspective of the trends and then analyze how some indicators are behaving and where should we put our focus and not just living in the short term of comparing year after year. We see how peace in the country has fallen 18%, homicide rate, even though it improved a little bit this year, but overall it almost doubled. Femicide has risen more than 100%. That's, of course, violence against women. The gun violence has doubled. Organized crime grew 40% in the whole country. Narcomenudeo, or retail drug crimes, more than 120%. Sorry. Family violence went up 64% and sexual violence grew 60%. These 2 forms of violence at the bottom are forms of violence that are committed against women. We need to talk about that. We are not having enough discussions around this. Or if we do, we talk about we talk from the perspective of the victims or from women's perspective. but we need to talk about that from the men's perspective, because when it comes to family violence and sexual violence, more than 95% of the victims are women, children, girls. But again, more than 98% of the aggressors are men, us men. So we need to talk about how we men in Mexico are living our masculinity. What are those things that we think make us men? Because this violence is very cultural. It has cultural roots too. And just to show you some data. When we measure violent crime, we measure 4 sub-indicators. Assault and robbery have historically come down. These are these 2 lines that they move together, but family violence and sexual violence, they move together and they have been going up in the past years. Do you see that the change in trend between these 2 pairs of indicators? So we need to talk about that. We need to tackle the cultural roots. We need to tackle the structural, the institutional roots of violence against women and girls and children. Other forms of violence, just to show you that it's not all about organized crime, or not only the regular violence we see or we usually consider. We have the 5 most violent cities in the world, out of the 10 most violent cities, considering the homicide rate. And in 2020, 524 police officers were killed in Mexico. 139 candidates or politicians were killed in Mexico just between the period of September 2020 to March 2021. We are not counting some other events that happened after March. And finally, Mexico has become one of the most dangerous places to be a journalist. Just to give you an idea, because the number here we had in 2020, 8 journalists killed for reasons we can assume are related to their professional activity. And if the number seems to or appears to be low to you, just consider that Afghanistan, the most violent country in the world, have that same year, they had 4 killings of journalists. Syria had 4 journalists killed, and Mexico in the same period had 8 journalists killed in Mexico. I was telling you about the cost of violence. What we say here, and this is interesting because we don't only measure public budgets spent, we don't only measure the private money that we waste, that we disburse containing violence or due to feared violence. Not only that, but we only consider the cost of, but we also consider the cost of opportunity of violence. This means that if just for example, if Liz and I we're going out today to have dinner, but in that very same street, a person, probably a young man, most likely a 20-year-old man, was shot to death, we're not going there to a restaurant. It's dangerous. We were going to invest in that city. We are not investing anymore because of violence. If Ivar had a business there, he needs now to put cameras, to put some iron bars, I don't know what's the name of it. But you need to hire private security because you don't trust government. You need to pay for insurance. The family of this killed boy, or if he wasn't killed, they need to pay for a hospital or get a hospital, and somebody has to pay for it, pay for an ambulance. We need to pay for patrol cars, guns for police, more police officers. If we catch the perpetrators, we need to put them into the judiciary system, justice system, have a trial, put them in jail. All of that costs money. Furthermore, or it gets worse. This 20-year-old kid, he had around 40 more years of productive life, and the economy is missing that. This kid had 40, 60 more years of consumption in the economy, and we are going to lose that. We cannot, and this is important to clarify, we cannot measure the most important thing, which is the human suffering, the human talent that is lost, the future that is lost with these 35,000 people killed. But we measure this, that is the economy. And this is useful because some sectors like the business sector usually react better to the numbers on the cost to the economy rather than the cost of lives. And I've seen it with some examples. So that's why we measure it. And the question that underlies here is, what could we do with this money that is draining through reacting to violence? What other problems we could be solving? Poverty, health, education. A lot of other problems would be solved with this money. Now, when we analyze the public budgets and how they are being spent, the story is a bit different. We see how the military expenditure is growing 14% over the past 6 years, from an already high budget to the military, but the budget for justice system is coming down 3%, and the budget for public security, this means equipment for police, infrastructure for police, training for police, and you can see how in many countries, including the US, Mexico, Argentina, France, South Africa, many countries around the world, I would say most of the world, are now, we are now asking ourselves, how can we improve our police institutions or our police officers or the police function? And so this is not a minor question, this is not a minor issue. The way we are not investing enough in public security and strengthening our police institutions. Just to give you a piece of data on this, when we measure how much out of the GDP, as a percentage of the GDP, Mexico is investing in their justice system and public security systems, we are around 0.7% of our GDP. When we compare this to the OECD countries average, is 1.7. You would say, well, but those are rich countries, we're not those countries. Well, if we compare ourselves with Latin America and other countries that are not as rich as Mexico, like probably Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, those countries invest much more than we do in their justice systems. The average for Latin America is 1.5%, more than double than Mexico. So we shouldn't be able to, we shouldn't give ourselves the permission to invest so little on our justice and public security systems. Some numbers about Guanajuato, which is closer to your interests. I was telling you how we measure year after year, and then we measure longer term trends. Look at these numbers on homicide rate for the past 6 years. Homicide rate has increased 339% over the past 6 years. Organized crime, more than 300%. Narcomenudeo or retail drug crime, 260%. Homicides with a firearm, 400%. Those numbers are outrageous. And of course, you can see how 6 years ago, the ranking of Guanajuato was position 14 out of 32. Now you are in the position 28. So Guanajuato fell 14 positions over the past 6 years. And I don't want to bring you down, or I don't want to depress you, but we've been saying this for a long time. Let's pay attention to Guanajuato. Let's pay attention to San Luis Potosí, Zacatecas. Indicators are getting worse. Indicators are decreasing or are falling or are getting worse. We are saying right now the same thing about Oaxaca, for example, Oaxaca State. Oaxaca is well ranked. It's, I think, in position 10 out of 32. So nobody's concerned. But when we measure and see the trends, we are concerned, because then we see how things are getting really bad. That's the use of these measures. Well, that's enough with the bad news. What do we do then? We want to talk about peace. Of course, we need to understand violence, but we need to talk about peace. And we have these two concepts. One is negative peace, that relates or refers to the absence of violence. When we talk about public security, we are talking about negative peace. This is very important. It's a good peace. We want that negative peace. It means we are not getting shot, we're not getting robbed, or we're not getting punched. But this negative peace is not enough. And it's called negative because we are naming peace by what peace is not. We are saying what we don't want. We want a Mexico without homicide, without fear, without crime, but we say what we don't want, and we need to say what we do want. When we talk about the things we do want, we're talking about positive peace. It has to do with attitudes, with institutions, with culture, with structures, with systems that guarantee peace in the longer term, in the longer run. We call it positive peace, complex peace, long-lasting peace, sustainable peace, and other names. In the Institute for Economics and Peace, we have developed this framework that we call the pillars, the 8 pillars of positive peace. And we say peace in the long run has to do with governments that function well, with a more just and more equitable distribution of resources among society, the freedom of speech, free flow of information, this multi-sided social tissue, which means good relations between neighbors, how people develop trusting relations or relations of trust, collaboration, and they help each other in an environment or in a community. That's key for building peace. Higher levels of human capital, because people that are starving, that are not well educated, that are wondering where are we going to eat tomorrow, they cannot look at the longer term future. We cannot find a horizon to build peace together in the future. We cannot talk 20 years from now. They're talking tomorrow, surviving the week and their families. So we need to guarantee this minimum access to basic services that are given with minimum acceptable levels of quality, with dignity for those sectors that are the most vulnerable. Acceptance of the rights of others and respect of the human rights, lower levels of corruption, of course. We need to elevate, we need to higher our ethical standards, not only in governments, but also in the private sector, the family, everywhere in the country. Because what corruption does to us is that they break these relations of trust. They make us suspicious. They make us more individualistic. And it's like our fire is on flames, it's burning, and we are bringing water on a bucket that is full with holes or with no bottom. So we're not gonna put down that fire if we don't have a bucket with a solid bottom. That's what corruption does to us. And finally, the participation of the private sector in the economy in building peace. For many years, the private sector has been absent of these conversations. They only get involved when peace touches them. And then they come and say, hey, what do we do now? Because now it got bad. We say, no, it's always been bad. It's just that you just felt it right now. Anyway, these 8 factors may not come as a surprise to you. They're very obvious. You knew this already. Of course, you are Rotarians. But maybe the key part of it is that we say that these 8 factors are interconnected and they function as a complex system, because peace is multidimensional. Peace is holistic. And so we cannot talk about reducing corruption without talking about education, talking about governments, talking about the media, for example, here in the free flow of information. So every topic or every pillar is connected to the other 7. And when we combine them, we are looking at a measure of resilience, social resilience. What this means is that societies, countries, cities that has these societies that have these 8 pillars stronger and more or better balanced, those societies usually recover better from a crisis, whether it's a violence crisis or an earthquake or any other natural disaster or an economic crisis or whatever crisis they're facing, they are stronger to recover, or they have better recoveries when it comes to a crisis. So we need to work on these pillars. Mexico has two especially weak pillars that are the quality of our governments and the levels of corruption. We need to work on those very quickly because, or with a lot of effort, because those are the ones that are dragging the other pillars that would help us. Those are the forces that would help us overcome this crisis. What this map means too is that no single actor can build peace by itself. All actors are summoned. We need everyone getting involved. No pillar is more important than the other. And we need to recognize that all factors are interconnected and they mutually reinforce themselves. This is not the topic today, but we give workshops to use this framework to design a peace building project for Rotary or any other institution or organization or even policy. We have seen it work, and this holistic approach is really useful. I'm gonna finish now just with a couple of a few insights, maybe, or final reflections. What do we do? Well, we need to get involved, of course. And I know I'm how to say, preaching to the choir. Right? I know I'm not gonna motivate you, but we need to call other actors to get involved, other sectors, especially those that are usually not involved or that they think they have nothing to do with peace. We need to push our governments, local and national governments, to strengthen the justice system. We need very urgently to transcend the public security paradigm. That means recognizing and acknowledging that peace is much, much more than just the public security or avoiding crime. Of course, peace includes public security, but that's not all. An example of this is how we ask police officers or police institutions to build peace. We want them to bring us peace. But most of the time, they are not even capable of bringing peace to their own communities, to their own families, because they are suffering economic violence, they are suffering discrimination, they are suffering job insecurity, they are suffering abusive forms of work exploitation, etc., etc. So we need to start incorporating those police officers into the well-being situation or the well-being environment we are trying to build for ourselves. That's what it means incorporating the positive peace approach to it. We need to know this, and this is important for us, that positive peace is transformational. It means that we cannot build peace outside if we don't build peace in the inside. And I know this is a bit cheesy maybe, but it's true. The bad news here is that when we open the array or we open the big picture of different violences, and I'm talking in plural violences, because it's not only one violence, when we open it and see that there are other violences, not only physical or direct violence, but cultural violence, economic violence, inequality is a form of violence, injustice is a violence, then we have to recognize, that's the bad news, that we all are violent in a way every day, a lot of times. The good news is that if we are all violent in a way, then every one of us can build peace in our immediate environments, just by changing our attitudes, just by changing our actions. And we say that we need to build peace in the first person or in first person. It means I need to start by me the individual, and by me the institution. So if I, Carlos Juarez, need to review my violences or my ways of acting, and my institution needs to review how are we committing violence. That means the Institute for Economics and Peace, that means Rotary, my club, myself, and we say that peace building is not something you do, but something you are. And that's a challenging part of it. And just as ethics, the work on ethics, the work for peace needs to be very uncomfortable for us. Otherwise, we're not doing it properly. It needs to push us outside our comfort zones. And finally, the last insight is that we need to resist polarization. All over the world, and in our country too, we are receiving this pressure to become ideological, political, and socially polarized, or to assume radical or extreme positions on several topics. And that is the opposite of what we need to build peace. We need, this is not going to happen by chance, because social media, Facebook, Twitter, every single stimuli is outside us, is pushing us to assume radical positions. So we need to resist it. That's why I selected that word. We need to resist it. And we need to opt for dialogue, for collaboration, for fraternity and solidarity. Otherwise, we are not going to overcome this crisis we are facing in our country. Thank you very much. This is it. And here's my email, the websites where you can download our reports. And I appreciate your time and your invitation.
Thanks, Carlos. Do we have questions? Are we going to ask in the chat? I guess I put a question in there, Carlos, and Mexico was it rated 140th, and I was shocked to see the United States was 122. We think of the United States as being a much safer place than Mexico, but it's only incrementally so. People tend to feel safer in places that they're familiar with, and I guess maybe you could talk about that, or you could just talk some more about what else we as Rotarians could do in San Miguel or in our own lives to make more of a peaceful world.
Thank you, Tom. About the U.S., we need to be very clear about what I always joke, but it's true. I always joke saying that I spend more time saying what the index is not, rather than saying what the peace index is. And this means we are not looking at country diagnoses or country assessments. We are not capable of understanding a country just by this number or the ranking position. With Mexico, it's different because we have an actual study for the country, and we get a deeper understanding. And then, yet again, when you read the Mexico Peace Index, it doesn't mean that you could, it doesn't imply that you could understand deeply any of the states, because we would need another report, another study, or a piece of research to understand that in that very specific context. That said, the decrease in peace in the US has a lot to do with the social unrest, with the protests, with the grievances of certain groups, like groups defending or protesting against police brutality, racial profiling, racial issues, and polarization, etc. So there are some global trends that are worth analyzing, and anytime if you invite me again, we can discuss those trends, because they're very interesting. Polarization is one, migration is another one. The racial matters that are happening in several countries where we thought those topics were in the past, etc. But yeah, so for different reasons, we are closer now with the US. We have a piece in the Global Peace Index this year. We have a section where we analyze people's feeling of safety. And we have a series of polls that are very interesting to see where people fear more violence and where people feel safer. And it's very interesting. And
Well, Carlos, I
And,
understand
yep.
you need to go. You've got another presentation to go. I wanted to ask you how we could do more with our polarization issues, but the club presents you a certificate. They're going to email it to you and frame it if you like for your presentation to our club. We're going to have a donation of 10 polio immunizations in your honor at the End Polio campaign. And I want to thank you from our president, Skip Essex, and Tony Ronci, our polio chair, and from Fred Collins, our acting president today. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.